Okay, the topic of today is we're going to be talking about something called Express. Yeah. That's some great excitement right there.
Yeah.
So this is a big piece of the mean stack. Obviously, it's one of our letters, right? It's our E. And the first thing we kind of want to talk about is just what is Express, first off. I know we talked about it really briefly at the beginning of the whole thing. Can you guys remember what we're using it for?
For helping create a server using JavaScript?
Correct. That is very good. Excellent. Very well done. So before, what we were doing is we were using this module called HTTP, and we were invoking a function called createServer. And we had to be pretty verbose about how we handled each request. So if you guys remember, we were doing some different things to find out number one, what was the path that was being requested. So that's one thing that we wanted to know. The other thing that we were doing is we were checking the actual request method. So we would do something like if request.method equals get, and that has to be all in caps. So capital G, capital E, capital T. And then if we're also checking rec.url, we would want to check what our URL was to see how we were going to respond to that. And what you guys are going to see today is that Express is going to take a lot of that grunt work out of this for us, so that when we write our servers, they're a lot terser. So we don't have to be a lot more terse. We don't have to be so verbose in how we handle every single request. So that's gonna be really nice. I'm sure you guys will like that direction that we're moving in. So this is an example, as we saw before, of how we would handle a basic request using the HTTP module. Let me blow that up a little bit. And then collapse that. Okay, so we're in this assignment, cars and cats, and if we are trying to respond to a request for a style sheet like this, so if we're trying to handle this, /stylesheets /style.css, we would do that on an individual basis. So we come in here, read the file where it is, we specify the encoding of what the file is, and then we pass in this callback function, which takes a couple arguments, errors, and contents. And assuming we actually found the file, we could go ahead and write this kind of thing, where we'd say what the content type is, and then we could write these contents to our response. And then finally, we have to end the response. So what would happen if we had a number of different files? Let's say they're all of type .css. How do you guys think we might deal with a situation like that? So maybe I don't just have style.css, I've got style1.css or productstyle.css, whatever. I've got a bunch of different files. How might we be able to handle that without writing single if statements for every single file that might be pulled up? Because I don't really want to say, if the URL is this, and then if it's style1.css, that kind of thing. Any guesses on how we might do that? Okay, but reading the file wouldn't work so much that way, right? Because if you've got everything in a folder, well, let me back up for a second. So what if it's not just CSS files, but what if I have some other static type files that I want to be able to reference to, like some image files, that kind of thing? So I may actually have multiple folders. I might have a style sheets folder. I might have an images folder, that kind of thing. So there's something about this file that I can use, though, actually to find files of this type, in theory. And what is that? So I'm pointing to it right here. What are we talking about?
Star.css or stuff.
So we're talking about the file extension. So if I know that I have a folder with all of my style sheets, and I know that all my style sheets are going to end in a .css, well, that's one way that I could potentially handle serving a bunch of different CSS files is by looking at the extension of the request and asking, is the extension of that request .css? And then if it is, then we would know we could do our read file against the correct folder and then pass in, just the file name that we got. Does that make sense to you guys? Does that sound like a lot of fun though? Right, manually parsing the file extension and then comparing that to, say, some different folders that I've got for different types of files, and then doing our read file. So that's probably not going to be a whole lot of, well, it's not going to be that efficient.
It sounds almost as long as doing the if statements, like the multiple. You're just taking out like 1 or 2 lines for each.
Yeah, potentially a lot less, however, because if we had a whole bunch of different files of the same type, like let's say I had 20 different images in my image folder, well, that's 20 different if statements. Did I hit this URL? Did I hit this URL? So I've got to cover a lot of different images. So if I just had something where I knew images were of extension .png or .jpg, .svg maybe, if I just knew of a few extensions that I could expect in a lot of different cases, I could look for those extensions and then just automatically route them to that images folder. So it could potentially save us a lot of code, but still kind of leaves us wanting something in the area of less code and more efficiency. So that's what we talked about here, using if statements to catch all files of a single type, just using the last n characters of a file name. And so again, if we're back here, in this case, the extension was 3 characters, and same thing here. Sometimes they may not be 3 characters. Like what's another type of file that might be a static file that doesn't have a 2-character extension? Yeah, that's a good one. Or what about just a JavaScript file? Yeah, so we might have a .js file. So there are definitely ways that we can pull the the last however many characters that we need after the final period of the file name. We could do that, but again, it's probably not really the best use of our time. And I think you guys are used to. How were you handling static files in Python? Do you remember what the method was for that? Yeah, in Django, exactly.
So they did have their own separate folder that was subdivided down underneath the app.
Right.
That it was theoretically in conjunction.
Right.
So there was a static one, there was a templates one.
Okay.
And within static, then there was like CSS and images and all that stuff.
Subdivided by different types. Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, as I mentioned, is Express. And Express is, first of all, what Express is it is a node module. We've heard this term thrown around a little bit. You guys remember what a module is? What is that? What does it mean if something's a module? We've used a couple of them so far. We used the HTTP module. We also used the FS module, file system. So what a module is really just a bundle of functionality. And some of the ones that are built into Node that we've already used, as I said, FS, HTTP. The other ones that we're going to end up using are ones that are not bundled with Node itself and that we will actually have to install. So you'll remember what we were doing the other day is we were actually, I think we practiced installing a package, something like that. And that was bringing in an outside node module that someone else has written. It's not part of the node core. Okay? Express, though, does use something that is part of node core. You can see here it uses the HTTP module under the hood and helps us map routes. So it takes a lot of this kind of if statement or verbose work away from us so that we can simply just focus on the routes that we want to be concerned with. So let's practice. We did this the other day, I think, but what we're going to do is we're simply going to install Express, and you guys are going to be pretty much for the rest of the stack, you're going to be doing this all the time. You know, you start up a new project, okay, boom, I need Express automatically. Generally, you're going to be using Express for most all of the forthcoming assignments. So let's open up the terminal window here. And I'm in this folder. I've created just a new folder for this particular demo. And in this folder, I'm going to initialize an NPM package, or an NPM project, I would say. So how do we do that? You guys remember how to start a new project with NPM? Is anyone doing any NPM stuff yet? Node Package Manager. No, it's not MPM. Sorry, NPM. No, it's not Morley's Package Manager.
He wouldn't have to be here.
Someday, though, yeah. NPM. Yeah, so if we're creating a new project, the command is just simply npm init. And then it's going to ask us a bunch of questions about the project. So it'll ask us for the title, ask us what the main file is that the project has, some other things. One shortcut that I'm going to show you guys is that if you just want to accept the defaults as is, you can just do a -y on that, and it's just going to create the package.json for you right off the bat without a bunch of questions. So if I go npm init y, you'll see I got my package.json, and it automatically filled in the package name. So because I'm in a folder called Express, it just used that as the name. And then this is the default version number. This is the default name that it's going to do. This is a default script that gets created. And basically, if I were to try to run this script, if I said npm run test, it's just going to echo that out for me. There are no tests currently.
So that's the name of the project you just created is Express?
This one right here, yeah.
So what if you
Exactly.
create another one? Is it going to call it Express again? Or is it going to give it a different name? If you just do the
If I initialize again inside the same folder, is that what you mean? Or
No, okay. So it's going to be a different folder the next time, so it doesn't matter if they have the same name. Okay.
yeah, exactly. You're not going to want to have all of your projects in one folder. You're going to want to have subfolders for each individual project. Yeah. So that's kind of a nice little shortcut. Just again, remember -y to blow through all those questions and just it's going to give you the automatic name of whatever folder that you're in currently. Okay. Now the other thing that we're going to be doing when we create these new projects is we are frequently going to be installing other node modules that are not part of the node core. And the one that we're going to be installing all the time is Express. So let's just install that. Express. Refusing to install. Oh, wow. So I guess what we need to do, yeah, I'm gonna.
So it created an error because the name of the
Because the name of our project. Well, actually, hold on a second. I think if I just change the name of the project in here, that should be okay. So we'll just call this Express Demo. And now let's try to do it. Success. So
We've got one
so
rule.
the name of our package actually matters, because if it conflicts with something that we're trying to install, you're going to run into that problem. It's like, hey, you're trying to install yourself.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really make great sense. So that's the process for installing a package. The other thing that you can do as you kind of get more familiar with this is you can just do a shorthand. I can say npm I and then the name of the package. Okay. And then there's another, one other thing which I think I showed you guys the other day when we were doing NodeMon, is that when we're doing a global package, you're going to add in this flag here, -g, to install something globally. Because I don't want, like for something like NodeMon, which I'm going to use with all of my projects, I don't really want to install that on a project-by-project basis. I just want to have it on the computer so that I can run these things using NodeMon every time. All right, so let me just... All right, so there we go. We've got Express Express installed, and let's take a quick look at the just at the Express documentation too, because you guys are gonna have to start getting used to looking at documentation. Is that big enough? So this is the very basic thing that you need to do to actually get an Express app going. Is you just simply, first we're going to create a file, and we'll do this in a minute. But what we're going to do is we're going to require that package into our file that we're running, and assign it to a variable. So here we've got var express equals require express. And then the next thing that we need to do, the very minimum, is we just need to create an app invoking the express function itself. So that's it, just to have an express app. These are the very first pieces that we need to have in our, essentially in our server file, to be able to run an express app. We've got to require express, and then we've got to invoke express, which actually is going to create an application for us.
So it's super similar to what we were doing in Flash.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I
Exactly.
just had a question about the NodeMon.
Okay,
So
NodeMon.
if we want to install it globally. So for these projects, I get it, like, because we're going to be doing all these projects from our computer. But what about when we're working like in a professional setting? Do we want to install NodeMon for each project, so that way, like, someone who's trying to use it on their computer doesn't have to go through like putting NodeMon or installing it for just to see the project? Or
You can install it as a, so there are two types of dependencies in Node. The regular type of dependencies, which we've been working with thus far. So if we install a dependency, it's just automatically going to be, and inside, I'll show you real quick, inside our package.json, you see we've got this dependencies object right here.
yeah, it's underneath the HTML or the HTTP.
Hold on one second. Okay. Okay, yeah, so in here, so we've got this dependencies object that has express. If I want to install something as a dev dependency, I can do that, and then what's going to happen is it will create another object called dev dependencies. And so dev dependencies are usually just things that we're using in the process of development. They're not really, because when we run these servers in a live production environment, we won't do it with NodeMon. NodeMon is just strictly a convenience factor for you, so that when you make changes to files, you'll see those changes reflected immediately.
Okay.
But when you're deploying a live production type of project, we don't need to have that kind of functionality. we're really gonna restart our server if we deploy a new code base. Okay. So yeah, if we're packaging it up and we want developers to be able to work on this and have hot reloading, we could stick NodeMon in the dev dependencies if you want to. But just for the sake of the assignments that you guys are going to be doing here, as you said, we're doing all of this on our local computers, and there's not really going to be a whole lot of collaboration either. So it's fine if you just install NodeMon globally, and then you can use it every time. So as I was showing you guys the other day, another thing that we can do is create a script just to start the actually, I'll leave that there. I can just add another script. We'll call this dev, and I can call NodeMon against some file that I haven't even yet created. So what that's going to do is it's going to attempt to run app.js, which, as I said, doesn't exist yet, but we'll make it so that it does. So the more familiar you get with the package.json file, the better off that you'll be. It's something that you're going to see with every single Node project, and it's a handy little file. All right, so we've got our Express installed, right? And then what we're going to do is just take a quick glance on what Express itself gives us. So let's first, let's create a new file here. And we'll just do app.js because that's what I put in the script. And then let's bring in, so we got var express equals require express. And then again, the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to create an app using invoking the express method. And I'll comment that out for now. The first thing that we're going to do is actually just console log Express itself. What do you guys think Express is going to be? Well, so what type is Express going to be? We know some different types. We've got strings, numbers, objects, right?
I would say probably either a list or an object.
Okay, that's a good guess. Yeah, so actually it is an object, and the interesting thing about this is that we're going to invoke Express itself because it has what's called a top-level function on it that can be invoked. But when we log it, we'll see that it is actually an object, which is sort of interesting. But let's just get in here real quick, and if I go node app.js, it's quite a large object here. So you see there's this function, create application, and then underneath this I've got all of these different sub methods. Like I can create a router down here. And we probably won't get too deep into the router stuff, I think, in this stack, but the router method can come in handy if you have a lot of nested routing. So if I had something where it was products and then I had a whole bunch of different sub-routes underneath that, router would help out a lot in that sense, because we don't really want to have everything in one huge routes file. It's better to sort of modularize it so that we've got, you know, a products route, and then underneath that we've got a file that goes through all the product routes, and then so forth. Same thing for other routes. So that's what that object looks like. And then, as I said, we were going to kind of glance over the documentation. We saw the basics of what we can do here. Here are just some other methods. Express static is .static is a method that we're going to use a lot. Okay, and that will be used for for our largely static files. So if we're trying to serve up some, as we talked about, some images, some CSS files, some JS files maybe, any of that kind of stuff, these are just static files that do not change. What are non-static files? Any ideas? Like when we talk about giving something back to the client that's non-static, what might be an example of that? A GIF. Why would that be non-static? Oh, because it's sort of changing in front of your eyes. Yeah, not so much because the file itself. It's what?
Like a video also counts as a static file?
Right, because these files are going to be the same no matter who's requesting them. So if Joe's requesting that file, he's going to get the exact same thing that Bob will get.
The HTML page itself.
Very good, yeah. So when we're sending back HTML to the client, there are a lot of times when we want to actually be specific to the user or the situation. Let's say that we're actually pulling some information from a database. That's going to be dynamic because we're not just going to simply give them back an HTML file. We're going to be assembling that HTML file as we go. So we're going to go back, reach back into the database, pull the data that we want, and then render this view using the data that we got back. In the same way that you guys were doing with Django. Okay, so that's what requiring express gives us. It gives us this object that has a top-level function on it that will actually allow us to create an application, a server application. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to paste in some assignment code from the express section, and we're just going to basically work through it line by line so that we have a very good understanding of what's going on, and that will make your future assignments a lot easier. Let me see if I can get past this. Next. Okay. So here we go. We come up to the Express page, and like I said, I'm going to grab all this code here. We're going to paste this into the demo that we're working on, and then I'm going to comment a lot of this out, and we're just going to kind of work through it piece by piece. So let me close that down there. All right, so the very first thing is we're bringing in Express. We already console logged Express, so let me just comment this out here. And then, because I like to see things changing on the fly, I'm going to run this with NodeMon so that we have hot reloading of the server at least. So I'll go in here, and I already created that script. So we'll just do npm run and then dev, and again that's going to run the script that I set up for it here. So it's going to actually do this command. It's going to run NodeMon with app.js. All right. Okay, so we are watching our files, which is good. Come back here to this, and let's see, the next step that we're doing that we talked about is we're actually going to create an app using the express method. Okay. Now we can console log app itself just to see what that is. Okay, so this is what app is. It's actually a function. You guys see this okay? It's actually a function that takes in 3 arguments. So this is the request argument. Res is our response. And then next is the next function that we need to run in our sequence. So sometimes we may go through a number of different route handlers until we find the one that we actually want to invoke. So for instance, if I'm inside of a route handler and I determine this isn't the route that I want to handle this, I want to just send it to the next route down the line. I can actually invoke this next method, which is sort of like saying pass. I'm not dealing with this. Let the next route handler deal with this. And you can see here app.handle against request, response, and next. So the app.handle is the thing that's actually going to allow us to do our routing. Let's comment that out there. And then the next thing that we've got is a base route here. So I'll uncomment this. Let's see if I get to the right spot here. There we go. Okay, so what do you think app.get means? Any guesses on that?
Routes to the slash, and then get some info from it.
Yeah, so that's correct. The URL is right here. This is just saying what URL are we looking for, and then .get is the method. Okay, so the methods that you guys have seen so far are definitely get and post. I think we briefly talked about put the other day when we were just doing the Ajax demo. But this is as simple as it gets with Express, is that you can just say app.get the URL, and then we're going to pass it a callback function which specifies how we want to handle that request. So as our application is running, when we hit that route, when we hit the index route, it's going to automatically invoke this callback function. Okay? And if we wanted to console log the request object, actually before we even do that, I need to uncomment this down here. This function down here is saying we want to listen at this port. Okay? Yeah, so if we're doing, is it kind of hot in here? Sorry about that. It's usually really cold in the dojo. Anyway, apologies for that if it's hot. But here's the thing: we're just looking at port 8000, and so when we're running this on our computer, we're just going to go localhost :8000, and then if we want to hit some route, we would do / and then whatever that route was.
Can we change the local port?
The port? Yeah, absolutely.
Put it like 12,000?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
We don't have to,
we're
like,
working on localhost 8000. But that's usually
Well, I'll change this one right now just so we can see how that works. So if I want it to be listening on port 3000, for instance, I'll just do that. And then we'll change this to, or we can even specify it as a variable too. If you want to do it that way, you could just say var port equals 3000. And then that way, inside our little listening function there, so I'll just pass in the port. That's the 3000 that I specified. And then inside here, instead of hard coding that port number, I could just add it on like that.
But it is adjustable.
It is adjustable, yeah. So in here you'll see it says that we're listening at port 3000. So that's good. So that actually means when I hit that now on the front end, we'll be able to see something, because you can see up here in our code, we're doing a couple different things. We're console logging the request object just to see what that looks like. We're console logging the response object again just to glance at it. And then what we're doing is we're sending just this string right here, hello express. Okay? And it's actually an HTML string. So usually when you guys do Express stuff, you won't see request and response laid out like this. It would be more like rec and res. Whoops. Typically people will refer to them that way, rec and res, and then in here we can just reference rec, and then this is res. So since I've changed the name of that variable, And again, you guys can call these whatever you like, but these are the ones that I recommend. They're nice and short, pretty memorable. You're not going to forget, what is my rec, what is my res, you know what they are. So since we changed the name, we need to say res.send. Okay, that's our response. And that's kind of equivalent to, remember when we were doing HTTP servers, we would say something like response.end, and we call that method. That's telling the HTTP server that this request response cycle is done. Okay? But here we're just telling it res.send this thing, and that actually tells, that's going to tell Express that our request response cycle is done. So let's check it out. So we're running this at localhost 3000. There we go.
A lot of files open, Morgan. Wow. Tabs up top.
Compare that lesson plan,
Yeah, I do tend to have a lot of tabs open, so I hope that's not distracting. If it is, I apologize.
It's the right number. We can't even read what they are. So
Yeah, they're all kind of hidden, right?
That's why he's doing it.
Yeah.
So, but the point of us kind of looking at this is just to see that, all right, if I'm creating a server in Express, do you see how simple this is? I just reference the route that I want, the method, off of there, and then I throw in this little callback here. And in this case, all I did was send this out. So if I had we didn't really need those console logs, but before I comment them out, we'll kind of glance at what they are. So these objects tend to be quite large. Yeah, it's like, where's the beginning of this thing? Jeez. Yeah, so I guess the objects were so large that I can't even get to the top of them in my terminal.
But you would see it you could see those in the console in the HTML that you just did that.
No, I'm not actually outputting this in the HTML.
Oh. Okay.
They were just okay. So that was a very good question actually. So normally all the console logging that you guys have been doing thus far has been on the front end of the website, right? So when we're in an HTML page and we open up our little developer tools and we click on the console tab, that's where we see all of our console logs because that's where we were writing our JavaScript. Now we're actually writing it in Node, which means that if I console log something inside Node, our console log is going to show up here in our terminal, not on the front end at all. So the front end has its complete separate runtime environment, which is not the same as what we're doing on the back end. Question back there?
So when you console log those objects, they're so big that you couldn't even go back and see where it said the request object and response object, unless you were like searching for it because it's in hundreds of lines of code or whatever.
Yeah, so if I, let's just do one thing. Instead of doing both at the same time, I'll just do the request object, and then I think, first off, I'll clear out the terminal. And then I think we would be able to at least see the request object. I just think the fact that we were doing both the request and response, that's why it didn't have enough room for it. So again, I'll hit the page one more time, which would trigger a request, and now we've got an object. Let's see if we can get back to, oh, we still can't get back to the beginning. Sorry. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in these objects.
Yeah. Wow.
And that just goes to show you too all of the coding that goes behind Express.
Yeah.
So it's taking away, it's abstracting these things so that you don't have to do a lot of this work that's being done for you. Thank you, Express. Yeah, you'll see what a boon that is because we don't have to write servers the way that we were doing with the HTTP module. It's quite a bit simplified. So that's essentially that, and we've worked through some of this line by line. The main question that we want to ask ourselves is, does this way of sending back HTML Is this how we're used to doing it, or does this seem to make sense for us that we would come in here and just res.send some HTML string? Is that how you guys were used to doing it with Django? Or yeah, so you had a templating engine, Jinja, right? Jinja. And what that templating engine does for you is it will create the bed on which you can build different pieces of dynamic code. So you'll have one complete page, and then you can change parts of that page depending on maybe the user or depending on some data that we pulled out of the database. So when we're doing our node servers, we're going to be doing the same kind of thing, which is that we're going to use some templating to create HTML files to send back to the client, but we'll make some changes to those files before we give them to the client. So it will be a fully fleshed out page. And the templating engine that we're going to use is this thing called EJS. I heard someone sigh about EJ. Does that name like evoke fear or something?
It's like EJ5.
Oh no, EJS. Oh, you're thinking of ES5 and ES6. Okay, so those stand for ECMAScript. Yeah, but this, you can see the name of this here, Embedded JavaScript Templating. Okay. And we'll just glance through this real quick because we're not going to need to know a whole ton of EJS, just kind of some basic stuff so that we can put some things on the page. I'll click on the docs here. Oh, and the URL here is ejs.co. I don't know. Let's see. ejs.com.
Oh no.
Oh my god.
Just blind HTML.
Wow. Well, it looks like somebody probably has the domain, but it's yeah, somebody's got it, but they're not apparently not doing anything with it. Yeah. So anyway, in the docs here, let's just click on docs, and this is just kind of an example of some EJS templating we can do, so we can check to see if there is a user, and this is the syntax for how you'll do it. You're going to use these percent signs, and if that is true, it's going to look a lot like JavaScript. As you can see, we actually opened up these curly braces here, and then we closed the curly braces down there. And to output something, you're just going to append an equal sign to that opening tag. So if there is a user, let's just output the user's name.
As an H2.
Yeah, exactly, inside this H2 element. So that's a very simple example of some templating in EJS. Here's where they actually talk about that. So they call that a scriptlet tag. Scriptlet. For control flow or no output. And that's why inside the regular scriptlet tag, we're just doing something like an if statement. Or maybe we could also do something inside there if we were trying to iterate through a list. We could do a for, some type of a for loop. And we'll go over that actually briefly in a minute. Then the other thing that you just saw there is that if we want to just output the value into the template, whoops, realized that was small too. We'll just attach that equal sign to the front part of the tag. Okay, there are some tags, some includes. Here's how to do a for each. You guys don't necessarily have to do your iterations this way, but this is one way that we can iterate through an array. So if I have a users array, I can call this method for each on it. For each takes a callback function, which would iterate through every single user, and we would do something with each one of those users. So here, yeah, let's not get into this too much. But if I just wanted to show the user's name, I could do the opening tag % equals, and then I could do user.name. So almost exactly the same as what we saw up there, only this time it's inside of a for each. So we're actually iterating through a list. Okay. The other thing that we want to do, without getting too heavily into EJS, is we want to show how to actually route static files in our application. So we've got this application. Let's say we've got some CSS files we want to be part of the application. How are we going to do that? We're going to use this function called express.static. So we've already created our app here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say app. First off, in order to use EJS, we have to set a couple things. So we have to say app.setViews, and then I need to tell it where those views are. And in Node, we have access to this thing called dir name. And what that tells us is this is the current directory that we're in. So you guys might wonder, why do I have to even specify that? The reason why we're going to use dir name is because sometimes we might be collaborating with other people, and we want our project to be able to suss out what the current directory that we're in is. And that's how we can do it. So this will tell us exactly where we are, and then we can append some path to it after that. So here, I'm going to set the views directory to just be the current directory that we're in, and then I'm just going to append views to it. Whoops. Like that. So that's telling Express this is where my views are housed. They're going to be in this folder called views, and then I'll create that folder so that we have it. Okay. And then back here, the other thing that I want to tell it is what is the view engine that I'm going to use. So in this case, we're using this view engine called EJS. So let's just call that out. We'll say app.set view engine EJS. And what that's going to allow us to do is actually render a template rather than just sending an HTML string like we were doing before. So inside here, whoops. You guys see what the problem was here? I created a file rather than a folder. So instead of views, we actually want a folder called views. And then let's just say we'll have a home route, or we'll call it like index.ejs. For some reason I don't seem to get my, alright, I don't really get my autocompletes on this, so I think what I'm going to do is just rename this .html, yeah, and then we'll change it back. Okay. Alright, so we've got that, and then we'll just say hello from the index. There, and then I'll change this back to EJS so that we, whoops. Minimalism right there. All right, so we've got our index file, and then in here inside of our app file, we should be able to now, instead of sending out this, we'll do a res.render. And we could tell it what view we want to render. So in our case, we're just rendering the index view. Okay. And that should be hot reloading for me, I'm kind of assuming. Oh.
Does it know where that file
Oh, you know what? We haven't even installed the EJS module. Sorry about that. You see, yeah, it's like we don't know where that is. So let's get back in here. And then our app crashed, as you can see down in here. Can't find module EJS, and we actually saw the very same error on the front end. Express is just, or Node is telling us there's a problem here. So let's install the app. Or install the module. npm install EJS. And this shouldn't take too long. All right, done. Let's run it again. npm run dev. Okay. There we go. So now we're actually using EJS, and that's going to allow us to do some dynamic templating. And in this assignment, or maybe it's not this assignment, sorry. Or maybe it's in views. Hang on one second here. Okay, here we go. So we have an example here in this views assignment of some user data. So we've got this array of users, and what we're going to do here in our template is we're just going to iterate through those. So just kind of show this is how we're going to do it in EJS. All right, so normally we wouldn't do it this way. We would obviously be grabbing this information from a database, but for now we're just going to hard code it. So I'm going to grab this data here, and inside my index route, I'm going to bring that in. So I've got users array, and typically in JavaScript we don't do this. What is this, snake case? I think this is snake case, but we wouldn't use snake case. We'd actually use kebab case, like this. Anyway, yeah, and you guys are used to that snake case probably from Python. You've seen that already. But in JavaScript, it tends to be kebab case.
Color was called
Camel case, sorry. Yeah, and then there's this other thing called Pascal case, where all the words are the first letter is uppercase. So instead of this, we would see users would have a U in capital as well. So yeah, camel case, good catch. It's not something I say very often, but but here we go. So we've got our users array, and it has just this array of users. Each one has a name and an email. All right, so inside of our template, we just want to simply iterate through these different users and display them, maybe in an unordered list. Does that kind of sound like it makes the most sense? Yes? All right, let's pass in a second argument to our render function. And as you can see here, the second argument is an options argument, an options object. And that's how we pass data to the view when we're using EJS. Do you guys remember what you used in Python to pass data to the view? What the context object. Yeah, so this is kind of like the same thing. All right, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to say users. So the users property is just going to be the users array that I had above. Now if I want to get super fancy, I can even take this off and just pass in the users itself. Because remember what we talked about the other day, if the property has exactly the same name as the variable that I've already declared and assigned, I can just use this as a shorthand. I don't need to set the value explicitly. The value already is what that variable references. Okay? So I'm just simply going to pass in my users to the view, and then inside the view, let's do something with them. So instead of this, we'll start up an unordered list, and since I don't have my shortcuts, do that, and then what we're going to do is use these tags like we talked about, and we're going to say, here's another way that we can iterate through them. We can say for user of users. And then since this is very similar to regular JavaScript, we actually have to have that opening curly brace right there. And then I also want to end this thing too. So over here, we'll just have an ending curly brace like that. And then for each user, I'm just going to render a list item tag. Let's do this here. So I want to output the user's name. How do I do that? Do you guys remember? Equals. Yeah, exactly. So we'll just say user.name. And then maybe I could separate it with a pipe or something like that. And then on the next line, or I'll just do it on the same line. So the other thing I want to output was the user's email address. So we'll do the same thing. We'll just say user.email like that. Refresh that. Oh, I just realized something. Because we're not specifically listening to EJS changes, that probably wasn't picked up. So if I refresh my page, I'm not going to see this yet. Oh, never mind. I am. Okay. But actually, that's a good thing because I didn't really want to restart. So there we go. We've iterated through all of our users. We just displayed their name and email. And that's not too painful, right? Not too bad at all. Beautiful. So I think we've essentially covered everything we wanted to do. Let me just double check here if there was anything. The only other thing I'm going to do real quick before we go is just show you guys how to link up a style sheet. That's pretty much it. Because linking a style sheet or an image, that process is all going to be the same because we're using express static. Remember the static function here? Did we use it? I think maybe I had it in there at some point and then it disappeared. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're just going to set a static folder real quick. So express.static. Actually, sorry, we're going to do app.use. And then we're going to use this function called express.static. And we're just going to take the current directory that we're in. And then we're going to append a static to it. So what that means is that when our app is rendering, I was missing a closing parenthesis. When our app is rendering, if it's going to glance through and see, can we find a static file for this route? So if I have like style.css or something, it's going to automatically look at the current directory that I'm in plus this static to try to find that file. Okay. And then let's just create the folder real quick. So we'll have a static, we'll have a static folder, and then maybe inside that static folder I might have some subdirectories. So let's say we have CSS, and then we'll just create a style.css. All right, and we'll just say background. Oops. We actually need some sort of selector here. So we'll say the body background is going to be blue. Like that. And then inside this view that we've rendered, we actually need to link this file now so that it takes effect. So we'll do link. Darn it. And then the rel is a style sheet. And then the href is going to be, we're going to go / and then I'm going to go CSS and then style.css. So what this is going to do is it's going to look in that static folder and see, do I have a directory called CSS? Yes, I do. It'll keep moving along until we get to style.css. And that's going to be way better, way easier than what we were doing with the HTTP module. Okay, so I've saved that now. And let's see if we get a blue background. Yes, we do. All right.
Excellent.
Okay. So the process to link to an image is going to be exactly the same if I had in my static folder a images subfolder and I put a bunch of images in there. Well, instead of going /CSS, I'm going to say /images / whatever the image file name was. Okay.
So that what you just used in the app.js.
Yep.
Where you said like
Express.static, this thing right here.
Used. So that's basically appending that part right there to the beginning of the href we're using. Just like it's shortening what we had to do with Jinja, where it was like static and then specify after static like the app name, then the directory or the CSS / styles, stuff like that.
So the way that this works, and this is kind of an important concept in Express, anytime you do app.use or app.get or app.post or things like that, they're all actually read in order. Okay, so if I do app.use up here at the top, and this is sort of the first thing that I did after creating my app, it means that for all requests that come in, it's going to automatically invoke this function and see if that exists as a static file. Okay? If it does, like in the case of that CSS file that we just did, it will go ahead and give that back, and the whole request, the request response cycle will be over. If it doesn't, then we're going to keep moving down the line down to these other handlers where we've got a .get on the home route and so forth. And in your projects, obviously, you're going to have more routes than that. But that's essentially how it works. Is it invokes those routes in the order that they're given. So if we say app.use, what that means is that no matter what route we're hitting in our app, we're gonna invoke that function, whatever it is. And express.static is just looking for the file to see if it exists. If it does, give it back. If it doesn't, just move on to the next route handler. So that's what makes this so nice and easy, is that we can just reference a general static path like that, and then we can catch all sorts of different files without explicitly calling them out in our back-end app code. Any questions about anything that we did today? So I think we covered a lot of ground, but that's essentially everything you guys need to know for the Express and EJS assignments.
So if there isn't a static folder with a CSS file on it, it's not going to throw an error. It's just going to skip it and keep going?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So if we don't use this express.static function, what's going to happen is we'll get down here to get any route, and it's actually going to return our index route, because the / is going to catch for any route. So if I have an index route, that's actually kind of an important point. Let's say I have some different routes, like / images, for instance. I've got to make sure that I put this app.get / typically towards the end, because sometimes it'll catch when I didn't want it to. This is like because it's our index route, you want to sort of shove it down in your stack of routes. It would just be the last thing that you call. But yeah, in this case, let's try that real quick. So if we comment this out, we should actually get a 404 on that, but I just want to make sure that I don't tell you guys the wrong thing here. So here, if we look in our console, okay, it's refusing to apply the style, but let me refresh here. So if I look in the network tab, where is it? So that's all we got back, is that Express is just telling us that route right there, /CSS/style.css does not exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is because I commented out the express.static. So we don't have a route at that path currently. Another thing that we could have, if we wanted, for instance, if I wanted this route to pick up everything, I could put a star in there and it would actually return this page on for that CSS file. Isn't that weird? So I've actually, you can see up there, I'm calling the style.css, but it's giving me back our index page because I said for every get request, so it was app.get and then star, no matter what the route, I want you to get back that page. Now obviously you'd never do that, but I just wanted you to see that that's a wild card that you can use. If I want all routes to give back the same thing, you just use, you just use the star, asterisk. All right, we good? Everyone solid?
Yep.
All right, you're dismissed.